I'm going to talk about, as was already mentioned by Lindsay, managing social distancing in an open society. This is a collaboration with Dan Larimore, who's also at BioFrontiers in computer science, Bailey Fosdick, who is at Colorado State, and Paul Doherty, who's at an NGO called NAPSIG. And we're all part of a larger organization called the COVID-19 Data Mobility Network, which started out of the Harvard School of Public Health, but now includes researchers from hundreds of different institutions, both domestically and international. And the group is focused on kind of, it's all academics, but we've all kind of stopped trying to publish papers and directing our skills at helping local states, counties, and cities understand the mobility in their jurisdictions as it relates to the pandemic and stay-at-home orders. So I'm going to specifically talk about how we used mobility data, or I guess actually social networking data, to monitor adherence to stay-at-home orders. We work with Boulder County, Arapahoe County, Denver, and Salt Lake County. And then I'm going to talk about a little offshoot of that where we're doing a similar effort to track density on campus as we return to research and eventually to scholarship. And this is all quite important because, as we all unfortunately are aware, social distancing and masks is really our only public health measure to prevent the spread of SARS-CoV-2. And since we're an open society, we're not going to deploy things like security guards or roadblocks to enforce these policies. We're really at a point where public safety relies on thousands of people adhering to policies that are meant to reduce transmission by reducing density. And the local officials that have to set these policies have a limited capacity to understand how their policies are being adhered to and to react when those policies need to be changed. So our primary data source has been Facebook Data for Good, which has this interesting history. Facebook started this as a way of providing data to people responding to natural disasters like earthquakes and typhoons, where you want to know where people are clustered or where there are network outages when you're trying to deploy relief assets. But Facebook realized, actually really kind of shockingly early on, that this framework would be also useful for the pandemic. All right, so what does the data look like? Here's the example of a snapshot of the data for the area surrounding Boulder. So Facebook takes a region, divides it up into tiles, and then each tile gives you 2 data points. The number of people, roughly the number of people that were in that tile over an 8-hour period, and then that's the current. And then they give you a baseline, which is the number of people they expected to be in that tile, given some historical data. And the view we're looking at right now is the difference between those 2 values. So the darker the blue, the more people than expected are in the tile, and the darker the red, the fewer people than are expected in that tile. And so what you can see is, so that box that I highlighted that's red is Pearl Street. So Pearl Street and this snapshot is very empty. It's 3 times fewer people than expected. And the other blue tile is a Western neighborhood in Boulder that has twice as many people as expected. So this is an example of good stay-at-home, good social distancing. People are not going to Pearl Street, or weren't going to Pearl Street. People aren't going into work. So all of the business districts in this map are red, and all of the residential areas are blue. So everyone's at home, no one's going to work. So you also notice probably notice there's a lot of empty tiles. This is because of the way Facebook handles privacy. There are a lot of mobility providers out there that provide a really creepy level of data where you can actually track somebody as they move around. Facebook takes privacy quite seriously, at least in this regard. And if there are fewer than 10 people in a tile, they do not report the tile, which is an interesting challenge for a place like Colorado, where you have a lot of rural and remote spaces. So you see a lot of mostly empty tiles in this view. But we get this data, and we've been getting this data since late March, and we get 3 time points per day. And from those snapshots, we try to understand stay-at-home adherence. One of the first things we actually realized is that every city or every county has a unique personality. And I have the top chart here is for Boulder, and the horizontal axis are the days of the week, where the weekends are a little bit darker shaded. And the vertical axis is the density. So you can see the 3 time points per day there. The morning is low, then it peaks in the afternoon. And the broader pattern here, at least for the baseline, which is the historical data for Boulder, is that the weekdays have more activity than the weekends. That's because people travel into Boulder to work and to go to school, and they don't do those two things for the most part on the weekends. A place like Erie, which is more of a bedroom community, has a different pattern, although it's a little bit more subtle. There's more density on the weekends than the weekdays because people aren't leaving Erie to go to work. And these unique personalities actually persisted after the stay-at-home order was issued in ways that I actually found surprising. Boulder emptied out, which I guess makes sense. And then Erie actually filled up. Erie had a population increase of about 5%. And what our hypothesis here, and it's sort of impossible to test, but is that that's the cumulative effect of nobody traveling and people coming home from college. But the takeaway is, if you did something really simple like divide the post stay-at-home activity versus the baseline stay-at-home activity, that would tell you that Erie's doing a really poor job and Boulder's doing a great job. Where in fact, it's probably the opposite. Probably Erie's actually doing the best job because their levels are very stable. So the point is that you can't do simple things like divide expected versus current to get an understanding of how people are moving around. You have to really dig in deeper to the individual patterns post stay-at-home order. And I you know, there's a lot of different companies that are providing a lot of different mobility estimates for across the country. And I think a lot of these are just take a very simple view and too simplistic view of how people are moving around. And so to dig in a little bit deeper, we actually took this pervasive pattern of weekday to weekend shifts. And almost every tile in the Facebook data shows this shift. And the direction of this shift is also corresponds to the kinds of buildings and kinds of activity that happens within that tile. So if there's more weekday activity, that would be a business district. So for example, the one on the left has a Walmart, has a bunch of shops, has a big office building. Or the one on the right, which has more weekend activity, is a strictly residential area. And for recreational areas, you see an even bigger shift up for the weekend activity. So you can look at these patterns and you can pretty much tell immediately, is this a business district? Is it a residential area, or is it a recreational area? But those differences or the dynamics that drive those differences should go away after a stay-at-home order is issued, right? You shouldn't be going into work. You shouldn't be going to recreational areas. So the first metric we looked at is taking the assumption that during a stay-at-home order, weekends should look like weekdays, right? You shouldn't have a change in your pattern just because it's a Monday. So to do this, we look at the average weekend density versus the average weekday density, which might have been different before the stay-at-home order, but should really level out after the stay-at-home order is issued. So the way this metric works is we say, all right, 0 is perfect adherence. That means the weekday activity equals the weekend activity. And then we set it up to where as it moves away from 0 in the positive direction, that indicates worse adherence. And more specifically, it indicates that there's more weekday density. And then if it moves in the negative direction, that means there's more weekend density. So with this one metric, we can tell how good is the adherence, and if the adherence is bad, why is it bad? Is it because people, is it because people are going back to work, or is it because people are doing more activities on the weekend? All right, so let's look at a little example here. So the baseline, you see more weekday activity than weekend activity, so you know it's going to be positive. So the line goes right there. All right, that's really great, right? We know we've now characterized the weekend score for the baseline. But the interesting thing is to look at week after week, how does this weekend score change? So we can compare 2 weeks, the weekend score for 2 weeks, by moving this dot in the horizontal direction the vertical direction for the next week. And this vertical direction would follow the same rules. It would stay at 0 if it's perfect and move up or down depending on how it diverges from perfect adherence. So in this case, we look at the first week, you see just a tiny bit of increased density on the weekend. So what we do is we just shift that dot down just a little bit. All right, so here's a single dot, but we can look at all, or single tile. We can look at all tiles for Boulder County and kind of get a sense for how things changed after the stay-at-home order was issued. We add in this, this red diagonal as a point of comparison. So if 2 weeks are exactly the same, then the dot would be on that line. So the distance from dot is from the line corresponds to the change seen in that tile from the baseline to week 1. So the overall interpretation here is that after the stay-at-home order was issued, there was a significant decrease in weekend density, or sorry, weekday density. So basically everyone just stopped working, which is exactly what you would want after issuing a stay-at-home order. You might be wondering about that lonely outlier where it had more, it's way above the line. That's actually a tile covering a grocery store, which I guess was a pretty sleepy place initially and got slammed that first week after stay-at-home orders were issued. All right, so this is just one of several metrics that we developed, and we're actually producing these situational reports for counties in Colorado and Utah. We're doing 3 counties. And this is actually our max. It takes a lot of time to put together these situational reports. But we've got all of this infrastructure for collecting data, for producing metrics. And so to help scale all of this activity, we're creating in the middle of creating this interactive situational report where we have the same metrics and we've paired that with a map so people can really explore the patterns of density in their jurisdictions. So here I've clicked on a dot on the map, which corresponds to JSCBB, and we can kind of look at the weekend score, which is up on the top right. We can look at a different one, which is a slip score on the bottom right, or the trend, which is right below the map. And the trend is we've used a model to model out the weekend, weekday, and the morning, night trends to look at the overall movement of density at this tile. So you can see that JSCBB was, the density didn't go to 0. There were certainly people working in JSCBB right after the stay-at-home order was issued. And you can kind of see towards the end of May, an uptick as the return to research began. So all of the dots and all of the lines here correspond to all of the tiles in Boulder County. So if you were a public health official in Boulder County, you might say, well, what the hell are all those top lines? Well, in fact, that's accounted for almost completely by retail activity. So here is the region along Canyon Boulevard and Pearl Street between Folsom and 30th. And if you know Boulder, you know that's where all of the big box stores are. And the other top lines correspond to Pearl Street. So the interpretation here is that the increase in density in Boulder County is mostly due to an increase in retail and shopping, which is about in line when the governor allowed stores to open again. All right, so we're doing all of this work for counties in Utah and Colorado, and we get this email from the chancellor. And in scanning this very, very long email, we came across something kind of interesting, that we're going to do this phased return to research and scholarship, and that we need this robust public health mitigation and safety measures, which are actually the exact same plan for counties in Colorado and the same needs as counties in Colorado. So our team reached out to the academic year 2021 planning team and sort of describing what we were doing and if they were interested in having the same kind of surveillance for campus. And they were, and we're actually in the middle of developing an interactive system, which I'll talk about. The unfortunate thing is Facebook data won't work here. It's at too low of a resolution. There are about 7 tiles covering campus. You can at best tell a difference between main campus and East Campus. You can see East Campus is still working, main campus is not. But one thing that campus does have, and a lot of, is Wi-Fi. And your phone tries very hard to find the best internet. And it does that by automatically connecting to the closest access point. So as you walk into JSCBB, you will, before you even get in the building, your phone will at least, without you doing anything, connect to one of the about 130 different access points that are deployed throughout the building. And as long as you stay near that access point, you can move around and you'll stay connected to that access point. But if you move away from it, your phone, without you ever knowing, will switch access points to give you better internet. So what we can do is at any point in time, we can just look across all of these access points, count the number of users that are connected to them, and that will give us a density estimate for the building, for the floor, or for wings, or even specific labs for this building. And the idea is to do this across campus. All right, so does this work? I think yes. So here's a plot of we're actually getting Wi-Fi logs. We're getting 24 per day. So every hour we get a dump of all the Wi-Fi activity on campus. Here's a plot of that activity for JSCBB. And it is basically what you expect. So this Monday here was Memorial Day. So you see very little activity on Memorial Day. So, and this is right around here is the return to research. So you can see prior to that, it was kind of sleepy outside of the E-wing, which were all the companies. And then you can see, some labs actually working on the weekend. So whoever's on the second floor, wing A, you're still coming in, good job. And then you can kind of see the fourth floor has less activity and fewer wings. So this is just for a specific building, and what we're doing actually is building this interactive interface for monitoring density on campus. So right now, we're looking at occupancy. So here's a map where you're looking, the darker the blue, the more people are in these different buildings. And what we'll provide is a way of clicking on an individual building, for example, JSCBB, and you can look at the historical data over time. All right, so what use is this? Well, as I said before, we're not going to, CU does not have the resources to deploy, sorry, hang on. So the use of this is that we are setting these complex schedules and policies to reduce density. And it's just a total shot in the dark. We really have no idea if this 20 minutes between classes is going to reduce density at all. But what we can do through this interface is we can kind of start to understand, is 20 minutes enough, or is there an unintended consequence where, since I have 20 minutes between classes, I'm actually gonna hang out and talk a little bit longer, or I'm now gonna go to get some more coffee, and we might need to know about these unintentional density increases or dangerous density increases so that we can help change patterns by changing policies. All right, so we're currently doing this. We're getting logs, we're developing these interfaces, but we really need your help. So everyone in JSCBB will get an email, so watch out for this email. We are conducting an IRB approved study where we are asking, if you are coming back into work, please fill out an anonymous survey, give us some information about your mobile devices and some information about your schedule, and that will help us calibrate the sensitivity of the system. It'll help us be able to tell, can we tell if a specific lab is getting full, or can we only tell a specific floor of a building is getting full? So you'll get an email soon. This is completely anonymous. We will not share this information with your boss. And in fact, part of our IRB protocol is to delete all of this information after the 1 month study is complete. So please be on the lookout for that. And the more people that sign up for this, the better. You might be a little bit creeped out about the privacy implications of tracking people on campus. And I assure you that privacy is incredibly important to us for two reasons. One, it's just part of our values, but two, if students get creeped out and turn their Wi-Fi off, we'll be totally flying blind. And we have this very specific privacy goal of preventing the tracking of individual users. And the way we're going to do that is, first, we're not going to report, these 3 individuals are connected to this access point. From the point of collection, we're actually going to anonymize and aggregate information to say that, oh, there's just 3 people connected to this access point. we're going to take a hint from Facebook. And if there are too few people at an access point, we're going to report 0. So you can't, on a sort of an empty day, watch somebody walk across the building. And then we're going to do something a little bit fancy, and we're going to inject a small amount of noise into the system such that it won't affect the high level analysis, but it will prevent the low level tracking of individuals. All right, so we're pretty excited about this system for CU in our return to research and scholarship, but we actually think it's got a really broad application. Because we are going to need to manage the density of public spaces for the foreseeable future, places like libraries, museums, and public parks. If we want to start to open these spaces back up to the public, we will need to do so in a responsible way. And that's hard. Without sort of boots on the ground, it's hard to know if your library is getting too dense, or something like a library or a museum or a park, which might have many entrances. It's hard to manage that. And so given the pervasiveness of Wi-Fi and the inexpensive, how inexpensive each Wi-Fi access point is, we can start deploying these not only as ways of getting on the internet, but also ways of managing density. This will become a really great resource for understanding human connections at a basic science level. One of the problems we have right now is we really don't have any good measurements of how many contacts an average college student has and what the demographics of those individuals are. So it's really hard for us to model the spread of infection on a campus. We're going to continue to have disasters, horrible things like mass shooter situations or wildfires or floods. In all these situations, you really need to know where are people clustered so that you can send help. And thinking more globally, there are going to be millions of displaced people through conflict, climate change, or disease. There are people who we need to very quickly stand up not only these refugee camps, but once they're stood up, we need to make sure that they are safe and healthy. And that's a very difficult proposition. But if we use something like Wi-Fi, which are already deployed in some of these camps, we can assuming that we do this in a really careful and ethical way, we can use this system to make sure there's not a dangerous level of density in these areas. All right, so that's all I have. So I'd be happy to take any questions, and make sure to do 2 things. I guess 3 things. 1, sign up for Software Engineering for Scientists. 2, keep your Wi-Fi on. And 3, look out for that email about our survey, which will be going out pretty soon. If you are going into JSCBB, we'd really appreciate your participation in that anonymous IRB approved survey. All right, that's it. And I'm happy to take questions. And hopefully my son doesn't come back downstairs and tell me that there's somebody at the door wanting to talk to me.